welcome everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar for today. Thank you to those of you who have tuned in and are joining us. Just in case any of you are new here, we do record all of our webinars that we conduct, and they are placed on our website on the resources page. There's a whole section for videos and things like that. So if there's ever any question about that, you can find it on our website, or feel free to ask us if you need help. With that, today's topic is going to be on what does this count as? It is a REACH tips training today, so we are going to be spending some time talking about some different types of tips as far as it goes to really being able to decide what does this count as? Everyone usually struggles with whether it's knowing what to record something as from time to time. So today's topic is going to be covering a few tips, things that we suggest doing to really help you feel more comfortable with selecting your entry types and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and get this started. We're going to talk through the REACH entry types first. We always like to start out our videos with kind of taking it back to basics and making sure everyone has a firm understanding of our basics before we get too far into anything else today. Then we're going to get into actually tracking initiatives and activities and the different things that you guys are doing as an organization. So today's focus is going to be heavily on how to put data into the system. So think of the different entry types you usually use on a daily basis. And then we will have some time at the end as well to open the floor for you guys to ask any questions you may have, or if there's a certain example you want to ask a question about entering, we'll have the chat open. And then if there's a specific question, we can always unmute you as well if that's something you prefer. With that being said, let's start with our basics. So hopefully this does not look new to you. These are all of our different REACH entry types. I recently have been doing some updating to some of our formatting, and I came up with this, what I like to call the REACH entry pyramid. This one's kind of a reverse pyramid. The top ones in blue in the first row are going to be your accomplishment output types. So those should look the most familiar, probably the ones you use on a daily, if not weekly basis to enter your organization's data. The second row is going to be in green, and that is our organizational improvement types. So again, another area where you're probably entering data into, at least on a monthly basis, probably, if not quarterly, that we are going to be using today as well. And then at the top of our pyramid is our simple key events. We know we don't have any specific output types there, but we know sometimes that comes into play when we are entering data into the REACH system that we need to make sure we are taking into account as a type. So that was kind of covering our basics. When it comes to knowing what does this count as, it's really important to be able to take a look at our data entry types here and being able to eliminate those that we don't need. This is probably one of the biggest tips that I recommend to some of our newer users or people who are struggling with knowing how to record specific things in REACH, is even just write these down on a piece of paper, print it out, have a sheet next to you that you can easily, cross it off once you eliminate it as an option. So whether it's something as simple as starting at the bottom and asking yourself, is what I'm tracking right now a key event? A lot of times this could require asking yourself questions like, did I have a hand in making this happen? If I did, then we know it's not a key event. If I didn't have a hand in making it happen, then we know it could possibly be a key event. The next thing to ask yourself with key events would be, is this going to impact my community or the work I'm doing in my community? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, then again, we have a key event activity and we can enter it in. If the answer is no, again, we can cross it off because we know it's not a key event. Those are probably the two main questions you're going to want to ask yourself to either use this as an output type or eliminate it. When it comes to asking ourselves about our organizational improvement options here, the first thing we're going to want to do is first ask ourselves, is this an internal activity event that I'm recording, right? These are our internal activities that we're doing. So that's our first question. If the answer is yes to that, then we need to break it up into the 3 different types. So if we know it's internal, great. We have that in our mind. But now I have to figure out, was this an organizational change? So that question could be something as simple as asking myself, did this have an overall impact on the functionality, operating, procedures, practices of my organization? If the answer is yes, awesome. We know that it is an organizational change. If the answer is no, we can exit out and move on to the next one. Technical assistance. Was this a assistance that I was receiving on a specific topic, typically, aimed at improving our functionality as an organization? If the answer is yes, we're going to say, awesome, this is a technical assistance then. If the answer is no, we're going to move on to our last organizational improvement type, which is training. Trainings, we're going to simply ask ourselves, was I taught a new skill? Was I taught new information? Did I receive training on something specific so I can be better at my job, be better at facilitating and running this organization? Was it someone else, not even myself? Was it someone else that's part of the coalition that went to a training, that received education, that enhanced their skills? If the answer is yes, and they were doing it on behalf of the coalition, then we know it's a training. If the answer is no, then we know we can X that one out. Now, the next and top line we have is our lovely accomplishments and outputs. We all know that these are probably the ones we use on an average basis that tend to get jumbled up the most, right? So I always recommend starting with the community action and community change piece, because most, if not all the time, it's either going to be one or the other of these. It can't ever be both of these together, right? So we know if it is an action, it's probably not a change. And we know if it's a change, it's probably not an action. Keep in mind though, everything you do is not an action or a change. So it is very common to not even use any of these when it comes to entering your data, and that's okay. Sometimes that's just par for the course with where your organization's at or what your organization is working on. But it is very important to at least start with these 2 so we can either rule them out or keep them in. Community action is our first one. A simple question that we should ask ourselves when it comes to community action is, are we working towards a new or significantly modified policy, program, procedure, or practice? If the answer is yes, then we know it's a community action. The answer is no. The next step I would probably ask myself is, okay, if we weren't working towards that change, did we accomplish or implement that change, right? Did we pass a new policy? Did we implement a new program? Did we modify a new practice or implement a practice, a procedure? If the answer is yes to that, then we know it's a community change. And if the answer is no, then we might not have a community action or a change, and that's okay. We'll just move on to our next output type. The next one we have here is going to be services provided. Services provided can be tricky sometimes because we might not always realize that we're providing a service, but the best tip or question to ask ourselves here is, are we educating someone, i.e. providing a presentation, providing a training? Are we enhancing someone's skills? So that's where that training piece comes in. It could even be an after school activity where you're educating and providing a training. And then lastly, are we providing support? This one can be a little tricky because a lot of times it tends to get caught up as we think we're providing support, but it might be more of a providing information. That's going to get kind of tied in on the back end with the strategy piece that we have when it comes to entering data. But really, when it comes to providing a service, ask yourself, am I providing education, support, or enhancing skill activity for people in my community? If the answer is yes, then we know we have a service provided. If the answer is no, then we can move on to media. Media, we want to ask ourselves basically, did we distribute anything with our information or logo on it? Simple as that. Because anything that has our name, our information, our logo is probably going to be counted as media. Most of the time, we have our newsletters, our flyers, our PSAs, our social media. That one's probably going to be used most, if not, very frequently for you guys. So it tends to come up quite a bit. And then lastly, resources generated. It's really helpful to ask ourselves, what are we saving? Is there anything within this activity that we're recording that has a value tied to it that we're not having to spend or basically fork over in order to have this activity, run this training, implement this change? It's really important to ask ourselves those questions because of our match component or, that in-kind that we need to get. Really asking ourselves, what are we saving? Are we having to pay for supplies? Are we having to pay to rent space? Are there people here that are giving us their time, but we're not paying them to be here? So making sure to ask ourselves, what are we saving? Will really get kind of your gears turning in terms of whether or not you have a resources generated type to record. Now, I went through those kind of fast, and I know that a lot of that is covered in our general reach training, but I wanted to make sure just to kind of recover it and make sure everyone's on the same page as we move into the next part of today's webinar, which is actually tracking those initiatives and activities. So we have a couple general activities that most, if not all, organizations either partake in or co-host, have, whether in some way, shape, or form it's been in the past, maybe it's coming up in the future, or maybe it's something you guys currently do on an ongoing basis. These type of things are just examples, so keep in mind not all organizations are the same. So while we're going through some examples today and we're going to talk through some activities that they might record for these examples, your organization might be a little bit different and might record it in a little bit different way, depending on what you have going on and how your coalition operates. I know it's kind of ominous, kind of, not super clear cut, but just keep in mind these are examples, and we'll be sure to leave any question time at the end so you guys can ask questions. So the first example we want to go through is going to be coalition meetings. Everyone and anyone usually has some way, shape, or form, a coalition meeting, a committee meeting, a youth group meeting, different things like that. So not just coalition meetings here, we'll kind of cover all meetings in this scenario. But typical activities that tend to come out of coalition meetings are kind of as follows as you see here. Again, these are just examples, but a lot of times when we are looking at our pyramid of output types or entry types, the first thing that hopefully comes to our mind is the resources generated piece, right? What are we saving? What are we not having to spend coalition funds on for this activity? Most of the time, coalition meetings tend to go straight to volunteer time. That's obviously the biggest one that you should always have in terms of meetings. The next one tends to be resources generated for in-kind things like space, supplies, food, mileage, different things like that can also come into play. But again, not all coalitions have these things because some of your space might be paid for by the coalition's funds. You might have supplies that you ended up having to pay money for, right? You might not get those supplies donated. You might have to pay for them. So just keep in mind about asking yourselves, are we saving anything here? Because most of the time, volunteer time is the biggest one, but there's also going to be some of these additional pieces from time to time. The next part of meetings in general is asking ourselves, is this working towards a new external practice, policy, program, procedure? Because that goes into our community action, community change piece, right? Asking ourselves, what are we actually working on at this meeting? Did we just sit here and all twiddle our thumbs and not do anything? Of course not, right? We're getting work done. So we need to ask ourselves, well, what did we talk about? Did we discuss the new policy we're trying to get passed at the local high school around vaping? If so, great. We know that's working towards a change, so we know we can record this as a community action. If at the end of the day, we ask ourselves, were we working towards a change, and we kind of come up with the answer of no, not really. We were just talking about general coalition work, some of our upcoming meetings, things like that. It was very general, basic meeting. That's okay. You're not always going to have a community action when it comes to meetings. We just always encourage you guys to think through that component to make sure you're not forgetting to record any community actions. And then the last thing that sometimes can come up in terms of meetings is an organizational change or an organizational improvement. Organizational change is usually the biggest one that can happen here because as it's a coalition meeting or a committee meeting, a lot of times this is where you guys make some big changes, whether it's a change to the way you guys operate as a whole, whether it is maybe updating or modifying logic models or action plans. Some of those big changes you guys might make at these meetings are going to be recorded as an organizational change. Other times we have seen in the past some coalitions as a way to educate and keep their coalition members informed. They will bring in someone to do a training at meetings sometimes too, because everyone's already together. It's really easy to have someone come in and give a quick 15-minute training as part of a meeting because you're all already there. That could also be a training under organizational improvements. So just keep in mind to sometimes think through that organizational improvement piece when it comes to your meetings, because it might sometimes need to be recorded in that area, and we don't want you to miss out on that. All right, so that was our first example. If you guys have any questions as I go through, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm kind of monitoring it as we go through, so if you need anything, let me know. The next example we want to walk through is hosting a town hall, kind of a summit, question and answer type session where it is hosted by the coalition or, co-hosted on behalf of the coalition. And the reason being is because there's sometimes a lot of different components that go into an event like this that you need to make sure you're thinking through and not forgetting to record. First things first, like I said, we always tend to default to that resources generated piece. It's the easiest one to think of because we just need to ask ourselves, what are we saving? And most of the time, volunteer time comes up first, right? We don't want to forget to track our people time, so we got that. Same thing as last time, maybe at this town hall, we decided to hire a professional speaker and they didn't charge us, or maybe they gave us a discount on their standard rate that they charge. We want to make sure we're recording that money that we saved for that professional speaker. And the same thing as kind of our meetings. If we have food, space, supplies, different things like that, we want to make sure to record those as well. The other thing to ask ourselves is, are we providing a service here? If we are in fact hosting a town hall where we are actively educating those who come, yes, we most definitely have a service provided, right? If it was a community training, again, we're educating those people here, we're enhancing their skills. We want to make sure that we're tracking this as a service provided. And then lastly, another thing that can kind of come up when it comes to hosting a town hall is media. This is one that sometimes we are very good at tracking and other times we may forget. So obviously, if we're distributing flyers, brochures at our event, that's awesome. We definitely know we want to track how many we're distributing. But another piece of media to keep in mind is all the media leading up to this town hall, because darn well that you're probably doing Facebook posts, other social media outlet posts every week leading up to this to promote it. Maybe you guys ran a PSA on the local radio station. So sometimes it's really helpful to not just think about the actual event itself, but thinking about the lead up that you're doing towards this as well, and making sure that we're getting all those other resources, media, things that we've been doing tracked. The other thing that isn't listed on here, but is always important to contemplate and think of, is that action change piece. What if this was our first time hosting a town hall? Our community's never hosted one and we decided, hey, let's host this, let's put all the pieces together and have this in our community for the first time. If this is the first time we're hosting this town hall, you know that then you have a community change, right? First time we're doing it, never done in our community before. So we know we actually might have to have another output here for a community change. Again, then make sure that you're thinking back through all those steps you took to lead up to this change of the town hall finally being hosted, because we want to make sure that we have all of our actions that we've done along the way as well. The next one we're going to kind of go through is going to be a training. So on here we have it as a tips, TAMS, responsible beverage server training, but this could really be any training that you guys are hosting or providing. And the reason being because we need to, again, think through what does this count as, right? Let's ask ourselves those questions. We're providing a training, so we're enhancing people's skills. We are providing a training, so that means we're providing a service. So that means we need to make sure to track this as, first off, a service provided. From there, it's then helpful to kind of think back through what other steps, things do we do at this training to help make sure that we're tracking all those other activities we need to. So did we have any kind of supplies that we gave people, booklets, information cards, things like that, that we distributed to those who attended our training? If we did, let's say we had ID booklets and, a handout, we're going to want to make sure to record those as media, right? Because we're distributing those, we're getting impressions, we want to record that. Next, it's always helpful to think through that. What are we saving piece, right? Again, back to that. Did we get free space for this training? If so, awesome. We know we have a resource. Did we have a few volunteers help us with maybe check-in for the training, facilitation, cleanup, setup, things like that? Awesome. We know we have volunteer time that we need to track them as well. Again, the other thing that we don't have listed here, but it's always important to think through, is that community action, community change piece. Is this the first time we're hosting this training in our community? If it is, great, then we know it's a change. If not, then we know we already have everything else tracked that we need for this event, and we're good to go. So training's pretty easy, nothing super crazy there, unless you have more resources, more media. Obviously, if you're distributing more than one type of media, you might have 2 entries. So keep that in mind, that sometimes for one single training that you host, you might have 1 entry for service provided, maybe 2 for media. You might have 2 or 3 for resources generated. So that already has me up to 6 entries just for my one training, right? Don't get overwhelmed. It can be a lot. We know that. We know reach data entry takes time. It is very important work, though, that you're doing. So don't ever feel discouraged, because at the end of the day, the data that comes out of this for you guys will be really helpful in terms of making decisions, getting other grants, and really helping your organization grow and support your community, right? So it's really helpful to walk through your different output types like we're kind of doing today, because it'll help keep you on task, because like I said, you could have 6 entries for one single event that we need to record, and that's a lot. So walk yourself through those different output types. Make sure to check off those boxes. If you don't need them, mark it off, because you know you don't need it, right? But then that'll help you kind of narrow down what you do need, so you can expand in those areas as you see fit for your activity that you're tracking. But we also have this page where I kind of actually listed out those different questions that's helpful to ask yourself when it comes to entering data. So if this is something you think would be helpful having next to you guys in terms of when you're entering reach data, feel free to let me know. I'll send you the copy. But these are what I tend to use, especially when it comes to reviewing data for some of our clients and helping out people, whether it's a TA session with someone who needs reach help, or if it's a reach training and they have a question. I tend to default to these questions because a lot of times this is where you guys will get tripped up on either not knowing which output type to select, or not having enough information in the description because you didn't ask yourselves these questions and didn't put that information in the description. So these can be really helpful, again, to kind of either rule things out, or maybe it's checking the box yes, and you're like, hey, I didn't even realize that my entry here was a community change until I read through this question and said, wow, actually, we did modify a new policy here, right? So that is definitely going to be helpful in the long run in terms of enhancing your skills as someone who uses Reach, as well as making you feel more comfortable in selecting your different output types, your different organizational improvement types, and being able to track your key events as well. So definitely something I recommend using. And hopefully you get to the point where you don't need the paper next to you and you can kind of ask these questions kind of in your own head as you go through your Reach entries. But it's definitely helpful if you're newer or kind of just want something to look back at if need be when it comes to entering your data. With that being said, again, I didn't see any questions come through, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up today. We'd like to try and keep our Reach tip trainings a little bit shorter. That way you guys aren't here forever listening to us blab on about Reach stuff, because we know it can sometimes be a little boring. But we always like to encourage you guys to make sure you're following us on Facebook. We like to post different tips, information, up-to-date deadlines, sometimes on Reach data entry for different reports and things like that on our Facebook. So if you are not following us, please make sure you are. With that being said, thank you for joining today. For those of you who are here with us, we hope you at least took a little bit of something away from today's webinar on Reach tips and what do I count this as. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always email us. But with that, thank you and have a great rest of your day.